we must step back and look at this whole issue of the education workforce, and I think radically redesign the enterprise. And I'll get to that in a moment. And then finally, I'm calling this next generation learners, but it could be called other kinds of things, but it is generally an assumption that we have fixed schools about as much as we can fix schools. That the real goal in the future is learning for all children. And when you say learning for all children, that gives you a whole different mindset than fixing the school. All right, I'm going to talk about these very quickly, and then we'll talk to each other. All right. This issue of standards. This is a big deal. There are times when I think, oh my God, what do we put in place here? But we are about to, in the United States, make a statement about what students should know and be able to do as a result of their education. 48 states have come together. When we started this, I thought we would have 20, and that would be a great victory. It's interesting to me that now 48 are involved in the conversation, and 41 have given us definite timelines to adopt the standards. We'll have over 30 by the end of the summer. That means that wherever you would go in the United States of America, we would have some common expectations about what students would know and be able to do. What would be the knowledge one would possess, and what would be the cognitive capacities of those students. It will not be perfect in 2010. We've had a dynamic year and a half of interaction around this. And there are lots of people who still disagree with those statements. But generally, the states are coming together in agreement around those standards. We'll set a process in place to revise those standards as we learn and as we move forward. It's one thing to have commonality of standards. It's another to set those standards very high. And that's what we've done. You see, we're operating on a set of conditions around the development of these new standards. The first is that these standards must be college and career-ready standards. That in itself is a statement beyond the minimalist kind of standards that a lot of states have put in place. Not so much here, but in lots of places across the country. That is, we're operating under the assumption that every student graduating from a high school in the United States has to go on to further education. And we're making that assumption because of what we just saw. That in this country, we will not be successful unless our children are using their minds and dedicating those minds to learning throughout their lives. And the next step to learning is not to walk across the stage at graduation and figure that you're done. Now, by college and career, it may not be a traditional 4-year university program. It might be a 2-year degree. It might be a professional certification. But every youngster needs a goal and needs an ambition to have higher education achievement as they move out of the high school experience. So our standards have to meet those criteria. We simply went to the higher ed institutions and said, what would it take in mathematics and English language arts if a student were to enter a credit-bearing course, not remedial course, a credit-bearing course and succeed in that credit-bearing course? That's the goal we set on these standards. So first, college and career ready. Secondly, we asked the folks who were developing the standards to make sure these are internationally benchmarked. They're as high as Singapore. They're high as Finland. They're as high as England. They're as high as the other countries around the world. Third, we said there must be evidence-based in this. And the end result of all that is that we have a set of what we hope are higher, clearer, fewer standards. And why would we use those words? Higher, obvious. We've got to get to the issue of preparedness for the next level of education. Clearer, because literally you can read in a lot of the standards documents, and this is one that Scott Trimble and I went at all the time when I was here. Don't tell me that a verb between a proficient student and another student is the only difference in a cognitive ability of that child. We've got to be much clearer to our teachers. It is literally possible for a teacher to be teaching to standards today in many states and two teachers be teaching very different lessons and both of them be correct. Because we're not clear enough about what we mean. And then fewer, that I think is a major issue for most of our teachers in the country. Our standards are so lengthy. We have literally taken some of this, in this process, taken some of the state standards, aggregating them out about what would it take if we taught those standards in good faith, and it would take about twice the amount of time that we have to teach our students in our schools today. We need to teach fewer things in a much deeper way. And our teachers in good faith are trying to meet those standards that we have today, and they're covering every one of those standards. And in that process, the students are being confused because they're not getting the kind of rich interaction around the content. If I know content very well, I can apply that content in a new circumstance. And it's just as important that a student know how to apply knowledge, to be creative in the use of that knowledge, to take knowledge and apply it in an unusual circumstance as it is to be able to state the content of a discipline. So that's where we're going with these standards. So for the first time, there's going to be a major shock in Mississippi because they've been reporting that they have 70% of their students proficient. And the reality is there's only 20% of them proficient. So states are taking on a major shift here in terms of their responsibility. This is the first link. I call it essential but inadequate because in my mind, these standards are only a beginning point for some major changes. But can you see what would happen in a system if we're very clear across the country about what students should know and be able to do, that we're emphasizing cognitive capacity as well as content knowledge. And as we do so, we're saying that we're going to be much more transparent about how we're going to do this. That means it is important for all of us, this community, to say we may not be where we are, where we want to be right now, but it is important that we stick to the goal. Remember, we have a choice here, one of two ways to go. One, we can change our expectations and ask less of our kids. I think that's an unacceptable pathway to take in the future. Or we can change what we're doing. And it's going to require some other changes in other areas. So what we're doing now is to think about, and very quickly, think about what are the implications of all this. Because our guess is right now that if we were to hand these standards over, and we will be handing them over to people, and you can see the pathway already set in the country. This is 2010. We have assessment designs that are coming in play in 2014 against those standards. We've got a time frame here to get the teachers ready to teach. And this is going to be an intensive time frame for all of us. But our teachers deserve help in the classroom. They need tools to help them get to the point where they can teach these standards. We need those kinds of instructional supports that are there. Our textbook is not going to get us to the high standards. Most teachers today who are not comfortable with their content rely on a textbook. It gives them a grounding, it gives them a base for moving ahead. A competent teacher, only a competent teacher, feels to the point where they can pull away from that textbook and begin to teach in dynamic ways. So we've got to replace the support structures behind it. We must redevelop our assessment systems, and we've got to change our whole federal policy. Right now, if a state adopts the Common Core, they will be punished by federal policy.